Listen. Now, I'm a big fan of Moorhead and Benson and all of their previous projects. They're those kind of filmmakers who do it all, from the writing, directing, acting, editing, VFX, crafty.
One of the big pleasures of having a larger budget is not having to do everything yourself. And one major challenge of having a large budget is you're not allowed to do everything yourself.
And this time around, they got to tangle with the stars?
The Endless specifically is what made it happen, just because an agent happened to see the last screening of The Endless in a theater because they liked the poster. And that agent is Jamie Dornan's agent.
So a reminder, never skimp on the poster. Now, personally, I do prefer the previous projects to this one and would highly recommend The Endless, just like Jamie's agent did. But for a duo whose working relationship has gotten them this far, I do respect their time travel story being about how time travels through people and how a friendship is tested through it.
The present is a miracle, bro.
Now go watch it on Netflix because we're about to get into full spoilers. Let me explain. So the story follows two paramedics in New Orleans who've been longtime friends. There's Jamie Dornan, who plays Dennis. He had a kid really young with his high school sweetheart and just had another 18 years later, but finds himself taking them all for granted, pretty much creating his own hell because he doesn't feel good enough. Anthony Mackie plays Steve, who's dealt with trauma in his past through the turmoils of the city, and it spirals down into a routine of drinking, pills, and one-night stands until he realizes he has cancer. And then, of course, there's Tom, who sucks at driving.
Fuck you, Tom. Get back in the ambulance.
Even with the bigger budget, they still shot it themselves, and you can see a difference between the way they shoot both characters to showcase their state of mind. The movie itself is also full of these beautiful long shots, with the first introducing them to a group who died using a drug known as Synchronic, which is what Brianna, Dennis's daughter, ends up using later on when she goes missing. And because Steve is at his ends, he decides to think outside the wire and hunts down the drug himself. He buys all the Synchronic at his local shop and is ready to destroy it before the chemist who made it appears in his closet trapped like R. Kelly, ready to just vomit exposition. Which, honestly, is the most I've ever seen in their movies.
I make synthetic drugs. Create new drugs very similar to illegal drugs, but the molecules just different enough to be legal.
I know what designer drugs are.
And even though Brianna's 18 and I love my daughter to death, she's a fucking awful babysitter.
Okay, now, the one thing that they do litter throughout the movie is this idea of the third eye. The chemist even explains that Synchronic affects the pineal gland, making younger people more susceptible to its side effects because theirs isn't fully formed at their age. And due to Steve's tumor on his pineal gland, where the third eye would be, he's able to feel the effects.
Maybe your unique endocrine gland makes you more enlightened.
Their concept of time is also a lot like Dr. Manhattan, the idea of it being like a frozen river or a vinyl where all things exist simultaneously.
Whatever happened.
The drugs themselves are based on actual head shops that sell these altered drugs that are like barely legal, yet ironically can cause more harm. In the movie, the doctor, who's from Ohio, who actually made Synchronic, swallows cyanide, so it alludes to the fact that the drug is supposed to be completely gone. But I know the directors talked about a whole backstory on the creation of it that could be a whole series, and I would like to see it because the movie needed more of that. Steve's first time jump happens by accident, and it takes him back to conquistador times, which is what makes New Orleans such an interesting place to tell a story like this because of the colonialism of that land by the French, the Spanish. You even see the first man who was there before the swamp melted, and the past is even shot in more of a shaky cam style to show how much of a pain in the ass it was.
We've been riding for a month, my love.
Now, basically, the rules that they establish is that a jump only lasts for 7 minutes. The travel period varies based on the location where you take the pill, and that's where you have to be in order to come back, hence why that dude in the beginning falls from the sky since he was in an elevator. And even Steve's costume changes with the jumps, since it was purposefully constructed to have this oozing design that parallels his cancer, warping more and more as he goes on. And while I did question whether the earth moving would mean that he just transports like into the void, or if touching a couch should result in him traveling with it, at a certain point, I just figured he was going to find a love interest back in time and decided to just stay there. Then I remembered that that's the other Steve, not this one.
The past fucking sucks, man.
In fact, the inception for the movie came from that idea of how the past varies from person to person, and that to many they may not want to revisit it, which is what Steve relays in the movie.
And fuck Back to the Future. Past was hell. Trying to make it look all cozy and shit.
Now look, as much as I want to go back to the 50s, I'd probably have to bring a switchblade.
It was humbling and daunting, infuriating, but
powerful because I see what my great-grandparents and great-great-great-grandparents had to go through for me to be able to sit here today and have this interview.
Now, as Steve tests out the different ways in which Synchronic works, he decides at one point to bring his dog, who, fun fact, is actually named Hollywood in real life, but they do a nice little nod by calling him Hawkins in the movie, but then they just disrespect this good boy by not asking him to stay. He decides to bring the dog to test an experiment and ends up losing him in the past. Personally, I would have tested it on a past spot that you already knew where it was going to take you to, not a new one where you ended up visiting the clan.
I can explain.
And you know what? Do you remember that Guinness record about Hawking? He actually holds the Guinness record for the world's oldest dog. He lived to be like 50 years old.
Oh my God.
So Hawking had a wonderful, wonderful life.
Oh, okay. Then 100% he's the one who pawned in Always on the Rock. Like the previous movies, they do a lot of match cuts that actually really work for this one because it establishes how Steve feels. He's become so disconnected with time and is just going through the motions that it actually takes his separation from his present to realize all the things around him. In fact, there's a couple of connections to the previous movies besides the intertwining themes, like these props that look like the ones that were used in The Endless, and there's that mystical red flower that has appeared in practically all of their films.
DMT-like drug that we synthesized from a red flower that only grows in a very isolated region of the California desert.
I did wish that they explored a lot more of the sci-fi aspects of it, but I also know that their main concept focused on the idea of human connection, the idea of reminiscing in the present and realizing that just having a beer with your buds is just as important as anything else you can do. As Kurt Vonnegut of the time travel epic Slaughterhouse-Five wrote, a purpose of human life, no matter who is controlling it, is to love whoever is around to be loved. And that idea of duos getting their relationships tested has been a through line of their movies.
You get until Earth dies, I get one more day with you.
So after all of Steve's experiments, he realizes that Brianna didn't time jump from the roof where all her friends were at, but the rock overlooking the river that was pitched as their hangout spot throughout. It's even the place that has Always, which is the final words that her dad said to her. So Steve's endgame takes him back to a civil war where he is able to save her, but the big question becomes, is he able to save himself? It does make sense for him to be gone. Steve had already embraced that he was going to die, and if he would have stayed over there, obviously he's going to be a goner. But in my opinion, if you're looking at it from a sci-fi approach and taking the rules that were already established, then I feel like that idea of him holding on to Jamie should bring him back from the past.
Apparently, the present can anchor you.
Instead of it being an item, as previously shown, it's Dennis, who's his constant. It's his lifelong friend who's truly his anchor, and after all they've gone through, is able to bring him back to his present. So while it may seem like the movie ends with no resolution, it just proves that no matter what came their way, their friendship is truly endless. Thank you guys for watching this video, and I'm curious to know your thoughts down below in the comment section. Who do you think wrote the thing on the rock? I pretty much don't think that there's an answer. Especially at the end when he jumps back and you see it. I was for sure it was going to be the daughter because of the, the final words that Dad said to her. It's their hangout spot, all of that. But that's probably like the one question. I have no idea how it ends, but I'm almost positive that, he does come back at the end because the whole themes in the movie lead to that. Overall, I am curious to see what these guys do next. I really like how they make a lot of behind the scenes to their stuff. So if you haven't seen their previous things, they do a great job at pushing just the filmmaking side of it and showing you an honest, just making of and behind the scenes to the works that they've done. So it's going to be really interesting to see them on a Marvel project because I know that they're doing Moon Knight next. What I really want to see, though, is them do a series, tackle something that's completely original to them, all completely directed by them with a crazy budget, just to see how creative they can get with it.
If I hadn't met Justin, I probably would be directing Jurassic World 3. And now I'm just doing this,
slumming it with me.
Yeah.
Other than that, let me know your thoughts on this movie, what else you want to see an LME on. Stay out of head shops, and until next time, don't forget to comment, like, and subscribe, and Jamie Dornan will leave you a voicemail.